Hey everybody, I hope you're doing okay. Hey, the Bundy Ranch just shared a post on Facebook, and here's what it said. It said that hundreds gathered in Northern California to hear Ammon Bundy speak. The environmentalists are threatening to tear out 5 dams that service farms and homes of that area. This information applies to all people wanting to preserve liberty and property rights for their prosperity. Please share. So I'm going to go ahead and share this at the request of the Bundy Ranch. And I hope you guys enjoy it. I'm anxious to hear what Ammon has to say, and it's good to see that he's still working to help the American people. And don't forget, his brother Ryan is running for office, so those here in Nevada, can vote for him in the primary, and hopefully he's successful. We need good people in office these days. Okay, here we go, guys.
Texas. And then I was able to, after a long battle through 2 federal trials, I was able to go home to my family on my son's 3-year-old birthday. So we'll talk a little bit about, I'll give you a little bit of background. So my family are five generation ranchers in southern Nevada. My great-great-grandfathers, or great-great-great-grandfathers, moved into the area in 1877. In fact, January 7th, 1877 is when they came into the valley, and it's a desert. I mean, it's as desert as you get. And they were sent down there by Brigham Young to go check out the area and to try to establish it if they could. And in fact, they weren't the first to be sent down there. The first group that went down there, they came back after not even a year, and they said that the area was uninhabitable. And so that gives you a little bit of idea where my family went. And there is a lot of beauty down there, but it is also a dry desert. And they began to establish the fields. They had to level them. They had to water diversion. I mean, much of what has happened here as well. The water diversion was miles above, so they could get the flow down to the higher fields. And then they also came in that valley with cattle, and they began to graze up on the hills. And what they found up in the mountains, the foothills areas there, they found springs. They're very small springs, but any little water, any drop of water was just extremely valuable. So they captured those springs, and they began to divert them throughout the desert so that the cattle wouldn't have to move so far for water. And we're talking about an area where it takes about 100 acres to produce enough food for one cow. And so my father ranches in an area about 200,000 acres. And it's still, I remember when I was 15 years old, I always had a dream to be able to, work on the ranch and have that lifestyle. And I have several brothers older than me. And my dad said to me when I was about 15, he said, "Son, this ranch is only, produce enough for maybe 2 families. There's just not enough, there's not enough income to be able to produce enough profit for more than 2 families." And it was his way of trying to tell me, "Son, you better find another way." But it wasn't, it was just simply the facts, the reality of things. It's just not an easy place to produce cattle. But yet, it's amazing that my dad and other ranchers in that area have been able to put cattle out on the desert, develop, if you want, the breed to be able for them to live out there. They have to have at least a quarter of Brahma in them. We always call they have to have some ear in them, and that's because the Brahma is the only breed that sweats. And so otherwise, they literally will just die out there. They can't survive. And so that's, and my forefathers came in there, and they began to carve a living out of that area, and it was very difficult. And in 1890, they decided, well, the state of Nevada provided a way for them to register their water rights, to take these waters and file them with the state. And the state called them stock watering rights, and they were tied to the grazing rights. And so all the processes, the legal processes took place. They filed them in the state of Nevada, and today my dad holds deed to 11 livestock watering rights in the area. And he established those rights legally through the state laws. And my forefathers did as well, and they were either purchased by him or he inherited them. So then what started happening around the late 80s, early 90s, and it had been going on before that, but the Bureau of Land Management primarily came in and said basically there was 53 ranchers in that area, and they said basically we're going to shut down your ranches. We're going to take your allotments and close the allotments down, and this was after a whole couple decades of regulation, and several of the ranchers were actually gone out of business or couldn't make it anymore, or had to go to work in construction or something else to subsidize their ranches because they couldn't sustain their living there off of the regulations. And let me just give you some of those things, those regulations that the Bureau of Land Management was imposing upon them. Things such as not allowing their cattle to go out only during certain periods of time. That basically they were shortening that time. And in that area, because it's such a large area, and you have to gather your cattle in a different way than most these ranches do, it's very expensive, and you really can't gather all your cattle like you don't go out in the field and just gather them up. It takes months to gather all your cattle. So these regulations of imposing that they had to gather their cattle and then feed them somewhere else and then put them back on was very difficult. And then also they would minimize their cattle count to the point, and it got to the point where in their own codes and regulations there was absolutely no way that the ranchers could survive. And in the Southern Nevada District Office, Bureau of Land Management District Office, there was a slogan that the district manager had in her office, and it said right on the wall, "No moo by 92, cattle free by 93." And it was obviously that their objective was to remove the rancher completely from the land, all the cattle. And they were doing it through these regulations and imposing these things and forcing them upon the ranchers to the point where there was no way for them to survive. And that was their goal. And it might not make sense, and I hope I can tie some of these things together of why they did these things and why they're doing them to you and have been for many years. But that's what was happening. And so it got to about where there was about 12 ranchers left. All the rest of them they just couldn't make it any longer. They ended up, generational gaps. The old ranchers got tired and they got too old and they passed it on, and the younger generation didn't want to fight, and just ended up being where it got down to about 12 ranchers. And then in conjunction with the county, the federal government basically went in there and offered these ranchers to buy out their grazing rights. And so they did, and they bought 10 of the 12 grazing rights. So now there was only 2 ranchers left. And I remember when that happened. I was probably 12 or 13, about the age of my son Bowen here when that happened. And I remember my dad being very, very upset about it because they only paid him $75,000. And my dad was, but that's how desperate they began, because they could see, and they were actually being threatened that if they don't take the money, that they're going to be put out of business anyway. Their allotments are going to be closed, so you might as well take the money and be happy you got a little bit. But my dad.
Wow. So we'll continue with this in the next video.